Hello, hello, hello. My name is Colin Datspa. You are watching, you are listening, you are enjoying Metropolis, a production of CUTV. There's someone here next to me, Drew Oyaje.
Hello.
That was Drew Oyaje. How are you doing, Drew?
I'm doing well. How about yourself?
Not too bad, not too bad. It's June. The weather's nice. It was kind of cold recently. There's that, I think, was it June 1st or 2nd? It was actually the coldest uh, June 1st or 2nd in Montreal's history.
January is the technical term, I believe.
January, is it?
Yeah.
Wow, look at that. Look at that. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. No. Now I know. It was like
I think
1
that's
degree.
maybe more of a West Coast term, but we can import it for our own use.
Thank you for bringing your culture here on this show,
My pleasure.
exposing us to the terms of the Pacific Northwest. Well, like, it's just when it gets cold in June. That's
Pretty much, yeah. June doesn't warm up fast enough. You think of, because it starts with J, so it's kind of you think of it as a summer month, but it's not quite there.
Yeah. No, I like how it evokes winter, but we're not here to talk about winter. Well, maybe the political winter of some provincial parties, perhaps.
The winter of our linguistic discontent.
The winter of our linguistic discontent. How much more can I stretch this metaphor? No, let's just make it clear and obvious. I have Drew here. We're going to talk about some headlines that I think are incredibly relevant to Montrealers, of interest to Montrealers, which is you, the listener, the viewer. On the menu today, we have Quebec's new language laws. They're in effect. Bill 96. Drew and I are going to talk about the conversation. We're going to have a conversation rather around language laws, how they have come to be the way they are today, and just kind of give little hot takes. We're going to spit some words about language. We're also going to talk about some switching up, some flip-flopping,
some crossing of the floor.
There's a Quebec Solidaire candidate who has switched parties to another party. We'll tell you which party later. And what do they do in those like clickbait intros? The answer will not surprise you. We're going to be talking about...
The answer will confirm all of your assumptions.
Yeah, correct.
Stay tuned.
We're going to talk about our premier, François Legault, and some of his plans to develop Quebecois infrastructure.
We got a leak of his pitch deck to the Carney.
Oh yeah,
the Carney Summit.
It was 4 slides. It was all Comic Sans. Sources say he did it himself. I'm just kidding. I don't know that, but it's an interesting proposition for some infrastructure between Quebec City and Newfoundland and Labrador. What are we shipping from over there? Well, I'll tell you what. It's not icebergs. It's a transmission line. We'll get into that later. Talking about interprovincial aid, there's a massive forest fire happening right now in Manitoba, Saskatchewan, Alberta.
A gesture of solidarity in line with the finest moments of humanity.
Absolutely. Quebec has sent our beautiful, our brave, our glorious water bombers. As we have with the LA fires, we just sent some to out west. And
a bunch of people who can do apparently you have to do 15 chin-ups or something to be able to be a firefighter in Quebec. It might even be more than that, but yeah.
How many chin-ups can you do?
I cannot do 15. I will tell you that much.
We got to work on that, Drew. We got to work on that.
My firefighting career has been cut short.
I can also not do 15. Don't worry, we're in the same boat. Then after that, we're going to be talking about just our favorite political actor, former mayor of Montreal, Denis Coderre. He is now calling on the Liberals to vote for Conservatives. Quite the bold move.
Yeah.
Not too surprising. We'll get into...
The man does know how to grab a headline.
Yeah, he really does. When we talk about why he's calling on Liberals to vote for Quebec Conservatives, there's a by-election happening right now in Athabasca. We're going to talk about his statement, who he's supporting, Again, this will not surprise you. And then the last little point we have, in my head, this is like
new numbers
yeah.
on Tesla sales. In
Yeah,
Quebec.
Tesla. How are they doing? We're doing business reporting now. No, we're going to talk about Tesla sales in Quebec. Registrations, rather, they're down. So clearly, Quebecers aren't.
Giving away the lead there.
This is going to be. I mean, this is. You want people to hang on to hear us talk about this, you know?
We will have additional insights.
About Tesla,
about Tesla's numbers in Quebec.
Tesla, yeah. Anyways, let's
get into it.
Let's start it off. Language. That's what we're talking about right now. So Quebec's new language rules officially in effect as of this past Sunday.
Mm-hmm.
There's always language laws. I feel like language is sort of like omnipresent. Debate. It's been happening for most of my life as I've lived here. I'm going to talk about what these rules are. So under the new rules, French must take up twice as much space as other languages on store signs and commercial advertising. That means stores with English names like Canadian Tire, Best Buy, and Second Cup will have to include generic terms or descriptions in French on their storefronts that take up 2/3 of the space devoted.
So this isn't the product labels yet. This is
does include product labels.
Oh, it does.
So
okay.
yeah. I'm happy you asked. So the latest, the article by CBC continues. The latest regulations take aim at generic terms, sometimes included in trademarks like lavender and shea butter, hand soap, for example. Those descriptive terms will now have to be translated as well. This particular rule caused the U.S. government to list Bill 96 as a trade irritant earlier this year.
They are irritated.
They're irritated. But clearly, the American corporations don't want to do translating.
Americans don't really have much ground to stand on when it comes to irritating trade, but
yeah.
But that said, I mean, I think the idea here is that they are extremely annoyed, especially because they have to like print a separate set of like product labels.
Yeah.
And the claim is that this is going to lead a lot of companies to like pull out and or raise prices. And there's like, debates about like specific kinds of guitars that are like they sell, a few dozen a year in Quebec, and they're like, okay, well, we're just not going to sell any then, like, buzz off. And so it's going to result in like less consumer choice. And that's the sort of critique that's happening. Whether that's the case or not, who knows? Probably it's not going to be that big a deal. Probably they'll just eat it.
It just ups, like,
it'll be okay. But
print costs a bit, right? Like,
exactly.
Just maybe like twice, but like most.
But they do love to howl about this stuff. I mean, every time it happens.
Of course. I mean, it's. I mean, the people who are like pray to the god of economy, they always sort of like they worship the economy, and they also worship the frictionlessness of trade, right?
Mm-hmm.
You want trade to have no barriers as possible, no barriers at all. But Quebec is saying we want some barriers. That barrier being you need to use a little more ink on the label.
Mm-hmm.
You need to make it a little more inclusive of French.
I do appreciate a precedent that says that saving a few cents per item in your inventory or whatever is not the be all and end all of policy.
Right,
maybe you can also have other priorities in your policy. Just setting that precedent. I mean, not that I think this is going to save the French language, which is the stated goal. But it's anyway.
Yeah. I mean,
it does set a good precedent. Is my point. Yeah.
This article talks about stores like Best Buy.
Yeah.
I think even in English, it's not really describing the product, it's not really describing the service.
No.
Like I remember the first time I saw Best Buy as like a logo, I saw ads. I was like, this must be a furniture store. I enter and it's electronics.
Mm-hmm.
What a disappointment. That they should have workshopped that more.
Mm-hmm.
That doesn't tell me anything about what
they should also add a truth component. So like in French, it would be a store where you get electronic equipment that didn't pass the first quality assurance check and is now being sold for a discount.
That's going to be, you know who benefits the most?
That would take up 2/3.
I'm sure.
To my credit.
You know who really benefits from this?
Yeah.
The sign makers.
This is just the conspiracy by Big Sign.
Yeah. Whenever I do these kinds of reports, I'm always like, who benefits?
Large format printing.
Yeah.
Stocks are up.
Big printer and big sign maker. they're the ones who are leading this.
Label makers, label making futures are going through the roof here.
The label making lobby is continuing to grow. But all jokes aside, people are up in arms about these language rules. Not just in the U.S. That's to be expected. I do expect them to sort of acquiesce, and eventually, like the people who are really serious about selling stuff to the Quebec market will absolutely just include will just adjust and make sure the product, gotta keep the product flowing. But I think there's a large conversation to be had here about sort of language policy in Quebec, right? Because there's a thing there's a thing behind the language policy that I think extends beyond just the kind of headlines and the back and forth kind of arguing and hand wringing by either the angry phones in Montreal and also the kind of let's say French the Quebecois nationalists here in Quebec. It's to me, growing up, I grew up in an English going to an English school board, and I was sort of always kind of aware of these loopholes or the kind of way that you have to dance around policy to make sure that you get services in English, or being let's say schools being able to get an English education. Like the only reason I was able to go to an English school is because my mom had gone to an English school, and then I fell into, because of that, I was allowed to go. Where in other cases, if my mom hadn't gone to an English school in the 70s, I would not have been able to. And you see, there's Quebec language policy kind of covers a lot of stuff. There's a lot of different sectors that are kind of touched by it. I just mentioned education. There's sort of an increase in constraints around who can go to English language schools, and there's sort of a narrowing of kind of the amount of people who can go to these schools, and naturally because of that, a narrowing of funding for these kinds of schools. And the idea is you sort of try to keep that keep those communities kind of contained, I would say. And I'll also say, not for no reason. If you're an Anglophone and you're upset about these language laws and how the Office of the French language in Quebec kind of acts, I can't blame you. Sometimes they're a little annoying. Sometimes they're just they're just such a classic kind of ridiculous bureaucracy. You hear crazy stories. One time I was in Villeray and I was talking to this local on the Castelnau. There's this board game store, and he was telling me that this board game store was visited by the Quebec language cops because the games they had in their display were mostly in English. And so they were I think hit with some fines. And so now they have to make sure that the ones in display are in French. And most of them in the store are also in French as well. But if you wanted one in English, you have to be it has to be this backroom deal where you're hey, can I get the English version of Catan?
Yeah, you need to know
he needs to look around,
You need to know the code phrase. To the secret handshake.
Exact secret handshake. They're all right, come later at closing, and then they have to do the deal. Anyways, that's just one kind of example. But this is, I'm just trying
to... The low-hanging fruit of linguistic policy is, I think, well behind us in terms of actual impactful inclusion and preservation of the French language. Now we're into consolation prize for not having actual decent government policy,
right? Yeah.
Namely healthcare, among other things, territory. This is okay. You get to have something to be upset about and fight about. As a way to compensate you for the lack of responsive democratic government that you might otherwise expect.
No, that's precisely. I love it's just all low hanging fruits and sort of, I would even say unproductive, kind of I don't know, advances in the language war, in the language debate. If we're imagining the language debate as a tree, it's a very low-lying tree with a lot of low-hanging fruit. All the branches are hip level.
Yeah.
Everything is really easy access, and none of it I find kind of challenging or intellectually stimulating. There's no actual questions that this kind of language rules presents that I'm oh, that's interesting. Well, that is an interesting way to kind of preserve French, right?
Yeah,
because it just turns sort of storefronts, businesses into it just sort of makes them the center of this language war, this kind of culture war between Anglophones and Francophones. And of course, I think what you're sort of alluding to is that in this kind of continuing war that's entered its like, I don't know, like umpteenth year. It's like the fighters are tired.
Yeah,
it's just tiny gains.
It's
if they can be counted as gains at all.
It's history repeating itself. First is tragedy, then is farce. I would say, but I think, I guess more to the point. I think the way that language politics is expressed, there's a lot of other ways that we could go. Like if you actually were there, if you really look at data oriented ways of like, okay, demographically, how do we preserve the French language? I think that's going to mean either providing more childcare and more incentives to like up the birth rate of francophone families, or it's going to be like bring in migrants from like other countries where they speak French, and create a society that is welcoming and integrative of those communities.
Those last two is a big ask, I think.
Well, yeah, but yeah, imagine if there were 10,000 complaints. I mean, that what the impressive figure here is that there are 10,000 complaints in a year about language, about like signs and different things that are happening. And so if you could focus that laser beam onto actual policy, like you could have some pretty interesting debates. But that's not, I think, the people who are funding and sort of creating the sort of repetitive motion of these discussions and these conflagrations are more interested in provoking a response from the other side. So it's these sort of measures are designed to sort of like, really irritant is the word. Like it's designed to sort of irritate people, both on a like sort of, irritate the business community. And then you can be like, oh, the business community is trying to stop French language from asserting itself. But then you can also say, okay, these Anglophones who don't want to like lose their like, I mean, in the 90s, it was all about like the pub having the apostrophe in the like name or whatever. And so it's a basic psychological thing. It's like it's an attack on your ego in some ways, or your visibility and your and your legitimacy in public. Like if you, it's like seeing literally on the level of like seeing and being seen, and being able to like share communal space, in the line of sight, basically, and you're like threatening to take that away from somebody, and of course they're going to react like disproportionately to like whatever the actual effect is, because that's like a cycle. It's like you feel psychologically like you're not allowed to exist, like you're not allowed to be visible. You're not a real part of the community.
You don't get to express your identity, your culture through your business sign.
And so even if your like fundamental rights aren't being like really impinged upon in any sort of material way, they are being sort of impinged upon in a psychological way. And so that provokes this big response, which of course then can provoke another response on the other side, and you can sort of continue the cycle. And I think, these big complaints are part of that sort of machine that keeps us from discussing, I wouldn't say real issues, because I think language preservation is a real issue. And it is something that I'm sympathetic to, to the extent that we're talking about measures that actually do preserve the language and do create sort of a cultural vitality over the long term. But this seems, like you said, diminishing returns.
I don't know that having 2/3 of a sign in French is necessarily any real kind of like active preservation of French. It's more, I think
the Steelman case, if you want, is that
what's the Steelman case?
The Steelman, well, the straw man is the sort of cheap version of an argument that you can easily take down. The Steelman is like, okay, what's the best possible version of this argument that fight against? It's like, okay, if you increase the amount of literal space that French takes up on product labels and signs and stuff, then people who speak French are going to feel more confident and poised out there in public speaking French, and they're going to feel more likely to say bonjour when they like order their coffee.
We're really in the weeds with this kind of.
Well, I think there's a case to be made. I mean,
we have to make sure the sky is the perfect shade of blue. When it's this kind of blue, people are 80% more likely to start with salut and not say hi.
I mean, if that was the case, maybe we should consider shading, changing the shade of the sky. We could spray aerosols into the upper atmosphere. I mean, why not? Let's at least give it a hearing.
Sure. Yeah. I think for me, this kind of stuff, especially with like I think language preservation is so essential. This like of course growing up like Anglophone, I think there's always like I'm so surrounded by people who are sort of like uh like crying out about the kind of like the persecution of Anglophones in Montreal. Growing up now that I'm an adult who has I think traveled the world slightly, learning more about history. I think I'm absolutely much more sympathetic. I think to French Québécois and the desire to preserve French specifically in the North American context, where the language of the hegemony, the language of capital, is mostly English, right? Especially on like a media front, where it's like, Québécois and Québécois people are like using so much platforms that are built, maintained by Anglophones, and I talk about stuff like Meta, like Spotify, Netflix, and already on those kinds of like platforms, you're not going to have so much of a centering of kind of like Quebec.
Yeah, I would love to see a Meta ban at the border of Quebec and Ontario. In the south. That would be a interesting linguistic
people smuggling in phones with Meta on them,
using VPNs to try to access illicit Facebook content. But then you have Quebec book. Like why
of
not?
course,
let's do it.
But it's more to say that like I think I'm sympathetic to the stakes, I would say, that the French language, especially here in Quebec, is up against when you look at the rest of the North American context, even like a global kind of like linguistic context. It's like it is sort of like the David versus Goliath thing in that kind of context. And on top of that, I'm going to add some more sauce to this. I think there's like a class base to the historical context of the French here in Quebec, where for most of Confederation, most of the time before Confederation, there was not really the French and English divide was one that had a class basis to it, right? You had like the rich.
The owner class was English speaking, and the bosses were English, and the workers were French.
Exactly.
That was all there was to it. Yeah.
No, that's precisely it, right? And then like over time, through like labor organizing, through kind of political mobilization, French-speaking Québécois have been able to take up more space in these different arenas, But then here we are nowadays, where it's like I feel like there's this kind of like wall that's being hit by this kind of by language preservation policy here in Quebec, which seeks to create a larger bureaucracy, which seeks to create more policing of language rather than something that's more inclusive. It continues to impose as well French over English in some spaces, and of course, there's like I think large like implications to this, right? Where like any kind of like language, any kind of French imposition that shows up in policy, there's always kind of like people who are against it, and then I think people who have reason to be against it. Like usually, often there's like pushback from like Mohawk communities here in and around Montreal, right? Because they primarily do not speak French. They themselves are also trying to preserve.
They would like to, speak Mohawk.
Preserve Kanyakeha, right? And that's to me. There's always this interesting kind of like fractality at play here, right? And I mean, like like fractals, like the kind of like when you watch like a Tool music video, it just keeps zooming in on the pattern, and there's no end to it. And I think there's this
deep,
and I think right. I think there's always kind of shows up, right? Where before the case was that Quebec was sort of the language of the underprivileged, the underclass, and now that there are Quebecois billionaires, now that French actually has this kind of like power and place among our institutions, the goal does not seem to be how do we. The goal of this kind of new like empowered group of people does not seem to be any kind of like emancipation of like language politics. It's just kind of like it's just flipping the script, right? No, it's just now how do we impose French, and how do we like it's much more about imposition of French than it is about any kind of like diffusing that kind of like language debate.
I mean, jokes aside, I do like that image of like zooming in endlessly on the sort of like exact dividing line between English and French, and just like, how deep can we go? Like, if we just keep zooming in, like, there's always going to be some new pattern that's going to merge, and it's going to be a repeat of the last one. But yeah, I mean, I think we are hitting the limit of the diminishing returns. That said, if you look at a 100-year timeline, is French going to continue to exist? I think there's a real case to be made, like that. That measures do need to be taken, and so it's a question of like maybe zooming out a bit and being like, okay, what is, instead of like looking at this like these sort of like superficial sort of battle lines, like how do we fundamentally talk about like
effective language preservation,
and what does it even mean to like reproduce a culture in a digital age with platforms owned by billionaires, who are just looking to profit no matter what.
Yeah, they're not thinking about 100 years.
No, I mean,
maybe the ones who want to freeze themselves.
I mean, this is another topic, but they think the world's going to end, and they're just trying to profit as much as possible in the meantime. So
yeah. I mean, so this is all to say, like, I think I absolutely agree, right? Because it's like, in terms of 100 years, what's the status of French going to be here in Quebec? And I think, I mean, it's like 100 years is a long time to project over, but like, you have some scenarios. I think that right now, the one that people talk about a lot is sort of this growing section of the population that is bilingual, that does not speak French exclusively. I think a lot of times when I see articles sort of about the decline of French, it's really tough to talk about what is. I think it's sort of tough, because I always have open questions about how do we define a decline of a language, and how do we define the deterioration of a language, right? And even like there's it's tough talking about that, because how do we? What are the tools we use to even measure that, right? And I think sometimes you see certain kind of like surveys or certain kind of studies use things like exclusivity of French as sort of the measure, or that's sort of like that's the benchmark that we're trying to increase. We want French to be the exclusive language, right? And I think in that kind of context, in that kind of model of talking about preservation, that sort of immediately it sort of puts at a lower sort of standing people who speak multiple languages at home, right? People who are bilingual, even people who are trilingual, quadrilingual. It looks at these people who are very talented, who speak all these languages, and sort of puts that on a lower register of, this is not the kind of language speaker we want. It kind of moves towards, I find the policy where it's set at now, in terms of how it's being studied and surveyed, is trying to position itself towards this kind of like unilingual future, which I don't think the future is unilingual. I think the future should be bilingual. I think there is a space to have French be preserved without that kind of unilinguality. And this is all to say, I don't think talking about storefront signs and this kind of stuff is going towards this kind of future at all, right? Because if you actually want to bolster French, increase enthusiasm for French speaking, I think then you need to have stuff like, I don't know, like it's like we talked about before, right? You have Netflix in English. You need to increase the kind of like French content. You need to elevate French culture to a point where people want to speak.
And when you're at a hockey game, you absolutely need to be chanting in French.
Yeah. Oh, I mean, we'll get into the second little headline here, but I mean, Drew's bringing up the there's a little hot news item. I'm sure many of our listeners or viewers have seen. Sometimes on special occasions, the STM buses will have little messages for you. They'll be like, "Hey, Merry Christmas to you. Hey, Happy New Year." Sometimes they'll say, well, I actually won't say that in English. It's a Joyeux Noël. And sometimes they'll say, "Go Habs, go," if the Habs are in the playoffs. But not this time. No longer. People are sort of up in arms because recently during the Habs playoff run, the buses were saying "Go Habs, go," and then because of the Quebec language office, the transit agency was sort of pressed to change it to say "Allez, Montréal, allez." Drew, you have a pretty funny take on this. Let's hear it.
Well, I mean, I just really want to take issue with the punctuation here. I mean, it's go exclamation point, Habs go exclamation point, and it doesn't make any sense.
Yeah.
Go Habs go. Like no, it's two goes in one sentence, and we got to get behind that. So that's crucial. to understand that, and then the crime, the grammatical crime of this punctuation is compounded by translating it into "aller," "Montréal aller."
Which so keeping that
doesn't actually make any sense.
Keeping
Montréal
the useless
exclamation mark. It's not a grammatical sentence in French. So it should be "aller Montréal," and with like 3 A's and an exclamation point. That should be "aller Montréal." You know, like I mean, come on, like this is the from the goal song from Logo Locas's. I think Le But it's called.
There you go.
And that's that's the but, that's the goal. That's what we're trying to get to.
I really like that, but I don't think that's representative of these complaints.
There might not be enough space to have the 3 A's. I will concede that.
You think the 10,000 complaints they got?
They might have to scroll on the LCD,
and they can do that.
That might elicit another 10,000 complaints from the commission if we have to get a new round of funding to get higher resolution LCD screens on the buses so that we can have the full grammatically incorrect French translation of "Go Habs Go."
Yeah. I mean, do you think is this the start of you building up a movement to fix these grammatical misdeeds?
Yeah, there was a time when I was hoping that Quebec politics would realign based on class and not linguistic identity, but now I think I've given up on that.
Yeah.
And we really need to realign politics based on grammatical fastidiousness.
Yeah, now you're leaning even more into it.
Yeah,
you're like, okay, we're doing about linguistics. Like, I'm in.
We need a cross linguistic coalition in favor of, I'm trying to think of the radio friendly term here, but the grammatical pickiness. I think
yes.
It should be the grammatically picky people in French and English united against the slobs, the grammatical slobs.
I gotta say, I'm on the slob side.
Yeah, okay.
I'm on the slob side.
Like this will be like a perfect sort of cross political spectrum debate show then, because we'll be able to have discussions where we each bring our different extreme of the political spectrum, and we can have sort of
I'm team
a debate show.
I'm team. You know what I mean. I'm team. Come on.
Sounds good.
Well, yeah. I mean, this. We're talking about the Quebec Language Office pressing the STM for this change. I mean, this is like a perfect example of the kind of like really like small Montreal news item that kind of pops up. That
this is bonjour. This is bonjour hi.
Yeah.
Version 2025.
Every 5 years, there's a bonjour hi controversy.
I mean, every year. Basically.
Every year, yeah. True.
When was bonjour hi? It was like 2 years ago. Yeah.
I think bonjour hi was a little further.
Oh yeah, was it? Okay.
Yeah. I think maybe the dates are wrong, but like just history rhymes, right? This is the whole thing. I mean, I think so. I think this ties into.
I mean, there's a machine. There's a political machine that they press the language button and the conveyor belts start to whir and the gears start to turn and the treats are delivered to the loyal masses of linguistic warriors, and the cycle repeats itself. So
there you go.
That's all we need to know.
There you go. Break out of the cycle, people. Don't buy in to the culture divide, the language divide. There are bigger things at play here, and hopefully that message reaches the millions, and a new golden era has been born.
Yeah, when this video goes viral.
Yeah. Anyways, I mean, I think, I think that's let's move on.
Create a new movement.
I'm tired of
diminishing returns.
Yeah.
Headline,
I'm feeling it.
News at 11. Diminishing returns.
The thumbnail is
linguistic politics.
I mean, talking about. Okay, we're talking about linguistic politics. We're talking about this sort of like mobilized group of sovereigntists, people who are interested in Quebec identity, Quebec cultural identity. Who represents that best in the provincial sphere, if not the Parti Québécois? Once thought completely out of politics with 2-3 seats after the last provincial election. Now, a resurgent force. They are alive. They've got
the spirit of Bill 101 runs in their veins.
The spirit
Absolutely.
of Bill. Yeah. Damn, give me some of that. Well, the news item we have here for you is takes place here up in Terrebonne, where there was a by-election just over 2 months ago.
Just on the North Shore, a little bit east.
Yeah. Have you ever been?
Can't say I've been to Terrebonne. No.
Earth good.
It's indisputable.
Yeah.
The earth has been so good but are we good to the earth? It's another question. Patrick Bonat, the new federal MP for Terrebonne, might have.
It's true. Yeah, the environmentalist. No, but at the provincial level, there was a by-election up in Terrebonne just over 2 months ago. The PQ candidate, Catherine Genticor, won. This sort of represents what we're kind of alluding to of this kind of resurgent Parti Québécois force in provincial politics. Polls have them just doing fantastic. Could be what a rebound, you know. And part of this story, of course, is maybe another party's slide down to back into not being official party. This seems familiar. Leftist party becoming not official party anymore. The candidate who represented Québec Solidaire, QS, in Terrebonne in the by-election, Nadia Poirier, has left Québec Solidaire, and she has crossed the floor. She has switched jerseys. She is wearing the enemy's colors. That's about it for that I have. But yeah, she left QS to join the PQ. She made the announcement on social media on Sunday. She said she publicly lamented the lack of support from Québec Solidaire during her campaign, which is kind of that's bad news. I think we were talking about how by-elections is usually like political parties get great returns on the kind of time invested in that they can just put all of their resources into one campaign, right? They don't like in general elections, you have to spread all your resources across however many ridings, either across the province, across the country. And with smaller parties, it's a bit of a drain on resources. But by-elections offer a great opportunity to really like focus your efforts, send in a bunch of like organizers, volunteers who are not caught up in other campaigns into this specific riding. And it seems like QS did not do that for Nadia Poirier, who was representing them in Terrebonne.
I think there may be some morale issues.
I think there are some morale issues. She finished fourth with 4.55% of the vote, and she got no visits from other MNAs except for the co-spokesperson, Ruba Gazal, who showed up for a solidarity beer. What does this tell you about the state of Quebec politics, Drew? What do you get from
drinking a beer? Is a kind of the minimum bar. I think it might be below the bar, effort. Honestly.
Hey, we really need your help in the writing. The morale is low. It's like, I'll come over. I'll drink a beer.
Yeah. I mean, I think what we're seeing is that Québec Solidaire has put all its chips on sovereignty as an issue and made that the defining issue of the party for like the last 10 years. And so, yeah, what we're dealing with now is that people, when they have the sort of off-brand version of, that is mixed in with like some kind of nominally leftist politics, but the main point is sovereignty. And then they have just pure sovereignty, and it's a left-right coalition with everyone from like Quebec's homegrown billionaire to some like vaguely progressive people in it. They're gonna choose the OG party. They're gonna choose the
name brand,
the name brand edition of sovereignty, and I think that's what we're seeing. So and there's a. I think people are tired of the liberal parties in disarray at the provincial level, and and people have grown tired of these sort of like sovereignty light, sort of sovereignty artificially flavored diet sovereignty brand of
to
keep the metaphor going here of the CAC. Yeah.
Okay, sure. So just let me get this.
So you have diet sovereignty, you have sovereignty, and then you
sovereignty
have
classic
off-brand discount sovereignty.
Sovereignty classic PQ.
Yeah.
Diet sovereignty the CAC.
Yeah.
Quebec solidaire, like off
President's choice sovereignty.
President's choice sovereignty. Gotcha.
Choix du président. Sorry.
Yeah. Of course. Yeah. Okay, gotcha. And
label is 2/3 bigger.
And then what's the Liberal Party in this soda context?
The Liberal Party would be, I don't know, Dr. Pepper, maybe.
Fruit juice.
Yeah. Can occasionally compete for the top spot.
Sure.
Yeah.
That's not what the people want.
That's not really what the people want.
Yeah. Okay, I hear you. Yeah. So you're kind of saying
they have to introduce new flavors, all the new like variations of like cherry and vanilla and different things in order to entice people into to buy their soda.
Buddy, the people want classic soda. It doesn't matter what you are.
Yeah.
It doesn't matter what you're doing.
Yeah. Sovereignty classic.
Yeah.
People are in the mood for sovereignty classic.
Yeah. So that's what you're understanding this as. I mean, it's kind of tough right now. The QS Quebec Soda is sitting at 11% support, according to Canada 338, and they're projected if the elections were held today, if the provincial elections were held today, Quebec Soda would win potentially 6 seats, which would cut their number in half.
Mm-hmm. And how many would the PQ win?
Let's just look it up right now.
I mean, I have to respect the game. Like, other provinces go between Liberals and Conservatives. Quebec politics can shift any number of directions at any given year. So 74.
Yep. You need 63 for a majority. Right now, the PQ are projected at 74 seats. Liberals second with a projected 33 seats. Oh, wow. The Conservative Party of Quebec at 8.
Yeah.
And then Quebec Solidaire with 6, and then the CAC with 4 or less.
Absolute wipeout.
What's it called? Like
remarkable that Legault hasn't stepped down given these numbers. I mean, it's incredible.
What a sea change.
Yeah.
I mean, this is such a departure from our current context, but yeah, this is
I mean, in the last election, the CAC was just absolutely dominant. Just,
of course,
just unquestionably, central political force.
Yeah, it seems like their coalition is sort of falling apart, right? It's I mean, they're able to get where they were.
I think this is the term. Yeah.
Yeah. Thank you. You're doing great.
I'm doing my best to get the 2/3 to get to 2/3.
Yeah, I mean, Quebec with the coalition having now Quebec, the CAC were able to get to where they are because they were able to steal votes from the Dr. Pepper enjoyers and from the classic soda enjoyers. Exactly. But now like you're saying, right? People want to get back to classic soda. Back that's the sort of people want to return home to their respective parties.
I mean, they could have been like, I don't know, they could have been kombucha. They could have been Sprite. They could have been done any number of things, but to differentiate themselves in the market. But
this is why we support multi-party systems here. I mean, look, you're talking about Quebec voters. I love Quebec voters. I love the kind of lack of allegiance, the strong allegiances that you see in other provinces that make sort of provincial elections somewhat
stultifying.
Yeah. Or here it's like, all right, I love
Game on.
Yeah. Whatever soda you want, baby.
Everyone, the battle of 5 armies.
No, truly. I mean, going back to this headline about a Quebec Solidaire candidate crossing over, it's like I understand morale might be low for QS, especially in a riding like Terrebonne, which is not really projected to win. Because I know for there's that by-election that was had in Longueuil, where Shofika ran. They put a lot of effort into that one. That was a very high-profile campaign. They had all the M&As came to Longueuil. They all kind of because they saw opportunity there, right? I think there's a lot of potential QS voters. There is a lot of Quebec Solidaire voters in Longueuil when you look at the polling numbers. I think that reflected that effort. But you cannot be doing this as a party of like having a by-election and just leaving your candidate like without any kind of alone without any kind of support, right?
Yeah, leaving them sitting in front of a half drunk beer.
Yeah.
Crying as they've been abandoned by their party. It doesn't work. But I mean, I think this is in the larger context of some like major blows that the party has suffered recently.
It's been
the departure of
Gabriel Dubois.
Well, and the previous sort of co-spokesperson,
Émilie Terrien.
Émilie
Lessard.
Émilie Lessard-Terrien, who basically quit and said like I've had it with the lack of support. So like this isn't the first time you've got like a high profile person saying like, okay, I'm done. I'm slamming the door behind me.
Well, I mean, there's also the controversy that was riled up by Aaron Boazi, sort of talking about. He was talking. It was at a fundraiser. He was talking about the othering of immigrants that happens in Quebec, and everyone.
There was an absolute pile-on by the
absolute pile-on by all of the National Assembly, including members of his own party. He wanted him to retract that statement, right? And that's like, I don't know. It's that thing where it's just starting like they're just starting to eat at each other. There's like a lack of like cohesion. I think one of the articles I think I like the most that kind of talks about where Quebec Solidaire is at now is the loss of the party's Dorion line.
Mm-hmm.
Did you see that in the Devoir? This was an article about former MNA Catherine Dorion, who's sort of like she's cool. She's kind of like
she's an artist. Yeah,
she's an artist. She's not like the kind of professional politician type.
She's unfiltered.
Unfiltered, and
I speech. Yeah,
I love that about her. She'll do things like just wear like hoodies and Doc Martens too.
Oh yeah, there was a scandal about coton watté. Like
yes, because she would just be in there like just zip up hoodie in the National Assembly. And people would talk about how that's like unparliamentary. But there's an actual challenge to I guess like just the idea of like the ideas and assumptions of these kinds of parliamentary procedures. Famously, of course, during Halloween, she decided to dress as a politician, and that's the only time she ever wore the full like dress and like gown get up that would have been proper political, where people got mad at her for that. Anyways, this article talks about it kind of laments the party's loss of the Dorion line, of having this person there, and it's also not just Catherine Dorion, but it's having a force in your party that pushes the conversation, that starts to question the things that are assumed about politics, about parliamentary procedures, and really put those things in like a stark light and makes us not take things for granted. It's like, oh yeah, people do have to dress like that. Why do they have to dress like that? Oh, it's sort of like patriarchal that everyone has to wear suits. Oh, it's sort of it just adds, it gets people's brains going. And you haven't had that kind of force in the party for a while. The party is sort of like eating away at itself. There's like more like internal fights that we see.
Well, I think there was a lot of party discipline that got applied, like to going against the party's actual reason for being, because you had the sort of pragmatic turn of and the sovereigntist turn, but then also a pragmatic turn of saying, okay, we're going to whittle down our like progressive policy proposals.
We want to get closer to power.
We're going to get closer to power. As a result, we're going to like build our legitimacy, and so you create a lot of centralized power and centralized sort of comms-based strategy that relies on telling everybody to shut up a lot. I think is basically what comms-based centralized strategy is, and so. As a result, you build up a lot of resentment, and there's a lot of frustration, especially when you have people who are sort of their appeal as politicians. In the case of Émily's Les Italiens, but also Catherine Dorion, is like that they can speak off the cuff, they can be very compelling, they can like be on an authentic voice and bring that across. And of course, that's totally incompatible with a centralized comm-based strategy. And so, of course, it's going to create internal tensions, among others. People sort of whittling down their values, whittling down like the kind of bold, transformative change that they want to like promote and be a part of. Also, I think creates tension. And so, you have a party that's sort of imploding as a result of a lot of the choices that have been made. And it's very unfortunate because like if there was a time when a party like, a party that can actually put forward a bold agenda of massive wealth redistribution, like now would be the time for that party to be aligned and ready to go. Especially when you're seeing, the CAC collapse to like under 4 seats, like that would be the time when you could make big gains. But instead, QS is also collapsing because it kept trying to like get closer to power in that sort of classical sense. And I think the part of the problem is that Gabriel Nadeau-Dubois' like personal brand was sort of created when he had sort of, hundreds of like militant anarchists like constantly criticizing him and telling them that he's being too centralizing and and he had to sort of like negotiate between those activist base of the student movement, which is when he rose to prominence, and the media. And he was an exceptionally talented communicator. And so when you have a militant base who's sort of telling you what to do, and you're like not the leader but the spokesperson, and you're having to sort of express that. That's tremendously compelling because because you're at the sort of convergence point of a major societal conflict and a militant base that has a transformative agenda, and then you're articulating these sort of fundamental critiques of society, and that's amazing. But then when you put someone like that in charge of a party, I think it changes the dynamic quite a bit, because you put comms at the center, and you make them the category mistake of saying, oh, like actually it's communicating well that's important, and not the content of what you're communicating.
Right. Yeah.
And if you are in the position of party leader, it's very different from being a spokesperson for a movement, because you're then what you're doing is telling the party what to do, and telling them which direction to go. And I think that direction has proved to be manifestly like not the right direction to go, even if it was well communicated the whole time.
Right. Yeah. The slow shift towards the center once parties reach a certain critical mass, I guess. It's a sad thing to see. I mean,
I don't think. Yeah, it's not inevitable. I mean, I think Amir Kadir did a much better job. Maybe he wasn't going to be the breakthrough voice, but he did. He did cause a lot of like big fundamental debates in Quebec society, while also staying true to basic values. There are pros and cons there, but I think the ideal is that you have the militant base that's empowered, and then you have the spokesperson who's just barely hanging on, trying to like navigate that, as opposed to being in charge and like large and in charge.
Amir is so off the cuff, and he's sharp. I find he has a sharpness to him as well. That I think it's not really quite been as present with other Coast groups.
Well, yeah, I mean, how many times he was like, oh, we should get rid of the Royals, and they caused like just an absolute meltdown in the media for like 3 days, three media cycles, and that is what you want, absolutely, because everybody thinks that, nobody's willing to say it, and it's like it's the sweet spot communication wise. Obviously, it doesn't make you a media favorite, but I think that is absolute. You need to be framing issues in a controversial way that puts you on the side of the population, even if the media hates the hell out of you. That is the only way you're going to break through as a leftist political party.
You get an outsized kind of like place in coverage, because you're a small party, but then you're also saying this stuff that people are like, this is crazy talk, but then you get boom, elevated immediately. Because if you're a small party, talking like a big party, then you're not going to get nowhere. You're just easy to ignore.
Yeah, they're just going to marginalize you, and that keep you be happy to have you there.
Take notes, folks. You're trying to start a political party?
Yeah,
push some buttons.
Yeah, you got to push the button to get 10,000 people to complain about something.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I mean, anything else you want to talk about for Quebec Solidaire and this candidate switching to Terrebonne? One thing I wanted to mention is, so with GND leaving, Gabriel Nadeau-Dubois, there is an open spot for a co-spokesperson. Usually the Quebec Solidaire they have to have one male co-spokesperson and one female co-spokesperson. And right now the position for a GND spot is open. We'll see who fills that role. But it's like you're saying, I think because they're co-spokespeople, there's still some leveraging that, of course, like the membership has over that movements have because of that, right? You get to tell them what to say and how to say it. And so they have less power than something like a formal leader. But which is not to say that they cannot exercise any kind of influence in that kind of in these internal processes. I've heard Saul Zanetti wants to sort of assign that leadership role. If he is able to capture that, then I think that would represent an even stronger kind of.
That would be sovereignty vitamin water. I think that would be would be the with extra supplements involved, and maybe they can carve out some market share that way.
No, exactly. It would be the sovereignty ticket, I would say. Option Nationale would have, if Solzhenitsyn is able to get in, Option Nationale is sort of happy at the front of the bus, not necessarily steering the ship, thank God, because Quebec Solidaire is the steering wheel is in everyone's hands. But I don't know. It's going to be interesting seeing how they try to move that conversation forward with sovereignty front and center. It's be something to keep an eye on.
It's a little demoralizing. The realignment. I think we can have the funeral for the Quebec realignment between these two news items, at least for the moment.
Sure,
It'll have to be resurrected. Wait till next Easter, maybe.
We'll see. We'll see how that's going. Next news item. Lego, Habs Lego.
Go Habs Lego, yeah, absolutely.
No, it has nothing to do with the Habs. Lego is proposing a power line between Quebec and Newfoundland and Labrador.
So basically what's happening here is Mark Carney is is having a meeting with all the premiers, and he's basically asked them all to come with their big project, like basically say, okay, what do you want federal funding that's going to be some kind of nation building mega project? And certain, obviously Alberta wants pipelines. Yeah. Various other provinces are proposing various other things. He's talking about east-west transmission lines, which is actually, a good progressive measure, in addition to the many bad measures. The expansion of the military would be another one of Carney's mega projects. But in any case, Francois Legault is bringing the plan of building a transmission line from Labrador, which not obviously, but does have a lot of hydroelectric power, but not a lot of population, not a lot of places to put it. And so right now, Labrador is kind of like a premium destination for Bitcoin farms, because there's all this cheap power that's just sort of not being transmitted. The transmission, obviously you lose power as you transmit it longer and longer distances. And so I think what Legault wants to do is build a transmission line to Quebec City, which would displace some of the power from the big dams in the north, which would enable Hydro-Quebec to sell that displaced power to the U.S. states to the south, which would create more revenue possibilities, because the states in the U.S. are trying to the Democratic ones anyway, the sort of large D Democratic states in the Northeast are trying to move to more green power, and Quebec is nominally that, despite the sort of destructive effects of the hydroelectric projects. It's considered green. And so they want to buy more of that power, and Quebec wants to sell it to them, and that creates revenues for Quebec, which obviously lets Legault cut corporate taxes, which he loves, and so on, right? But I think the sort of even deeper background to all this is that at the same time as they're trying to increase revenues for Hydro-Quebec, they're also trying, the Legault government, and I would say there's a multi-party elite push within Quebec to try to privatize Hydro-Quebec, which is obviously the crown jewel of the sort of Quebec sovereigntist movement and sort of social democracy in Quebec. They famously sort of bought out Power Corp, made Desmarais a very, very, very rich man. Paul Desmarais, who was used to run the Power Corp, the power company in Quebec. They turned it into Hydro-Quebec.
I think along with two other companies.
Yeah, exactly. So they nationalized it at great expense, but that created a kind of a tremendous economic engine that I think has been a point of pride for large swaths of Quebec politics for a long time. But now I think there's they see dollar signs, the business class in Quebec sees dollar signs in their eyes, and international investors probably too, when they look at Hydro-Quebec, because it's tremendously lucrative, especially to be able to sell this, more or less green power to the U.S. And so they are in the process of trying to privatize certain little bits of it. So the key pieces like the electrical charging stations in all over the province. They have a huge network of charging stations for electrical cars. That's obviously only going to expand, but they want to, now that they put all this public investment into it, they want to privatize it. Public expense, private profit. It's that was pretty much the term
that's what the signs say.
That's what the union, the Canadian Union of Public Employees spokesperson said about this deal. And they're also they have a high voltage testing center that they're also selling off to Hitachi. So an international, not even a Quebec company, an international conglomerate. And so, I would say that the context here is that they're fattening up Hydro-Quebec in order to sell it off. Yeah. And so effectively what's happening is they're asking the federal government for a giant subsidy to make Hydro-Quebec more valuable, with the intention, and they probably won't. I mean, they might not be successful because there were protests in 7 different places all over Quebec against even these piecemeal privatizations. So it's not a done deal, but basically that's what they're asking for. It's a giant subsidy, and in and of itself, it's hard. I'm not going to say that a transmission line between Labrador and Quebec City is a bad thing. Although you'd want to look at the cost benefit, obviously, but
those are the larger projects
anything that can
into
bring that electricity into actual useful uses and not just Bitcoin mining. Obviously, it's not just Bitcoin mining, but there are big Bitcoin farms in Labrador. So it's not inherently a bad thing, but it is. But I think it has to be understood as a subsidy for a gigantic corporate giveaway that they're sort of teeing up, and they're very excited about.
Right. Yeah. Do you think Quebec? Do you think Hydro-Quebec could go the way of Petro-Canada, Air Canada? You think that that's a potential in the works?
Yeah, I mean, if we keep fighting about language instead of and we're sufficiently distracted. I mean, I think Quebec does have a really pretty strong sort of social democratic value set, and Hydro-Quebec is such a high profile thing that I think they're doing what they can right now, which is carve off little lucrative pieces and hand them out to corporations. And as long as hydro keeps being cheap in Quebec, it's absurdly, it's a huge benefit to living in Quebec. I mean, obviously you pay massive taxes relative to other provinces, but you do get cheap power, so it offsets a little bit. And at least in that respect, you can heat your home with electric. I mean, whereas other provinces, you don't. That's not even on the table.
Option,
yeah. I mean,
not for the same price.
Not for the same price. That's for sure.
Yeah. I think one thing that's interesting about this institution like Hydro-Quebec is that because it's this publicly run thing, it has that kind of the main goal is not profit, right? There's actual kind of how do we make sure that we provide electricity for Quebecers? I know Hydro-Quebec does a lot of funding of tree research as well. They're a big grant funder through that. I think one of the interesting things I learned about Hydro-Quebec over the last few years was that if you kind of rack up a debt with Hydro-Quebec, they have a very lax policy about releasing you of that. Where if you kind of run behind on your payments, you can go into this special thing where it's now I have to check if this is still applicable, but from last time I heard, it was from some social workers who were helping people who were racking up a debt with Hydro-Quebec. But it's essentially they'll switch you to this special kind of solidarity program, let's call it. You make these very, very small minimum payments a couple number of months in a row, and if you do that in a row, your debt is cleared.
Interesting. I mean, there are a lot of progressive measures that are sort of
you just wouldn't have that, right?
Holdover from a social democratic era.
No, exactly, and you just would not have that with if Hydro-Quebec went the private way, But it's you're saying. I think we're still a long way from that. There's still, I think, compared to
you also wouldn't have that if in the 70s there hadn't been general strikes and Maoists, militantly taking over the streets and creating, all kinds of things were happening in that sort of moment of political upheaval that I think just wouldn't be created now because we're in such a reactionary sort of period of middle class people sort of hanging on to what they have as opposed to a working class asserting itself as a collective force.
Getting more gains. Yeah. I mean, one thing that was interesting when Hydro-Quebec was sort of nationalized is those liberals nationalized it, and they were like, "Don't worry, we're not going to nationalize more. This is just the one-off. We check the books. It makes sense for us to do this." And I think it kind of ties into what we were talking about before the show about Quebec not really having this kind of billionaire capital base, right, to buy up this kind of thing, where maybe the government was like, listen, in the interest of industries, it makes sense for us to take over these power companies to do this kind of public good, reduce the completely exploitative charging schemes that these power companies had set up over regular Quebecois, and we're going to have something that's a little more equitable, fair for regular people, and also, of course, for the industries. If only they had nationalized more stuff, then maybe there'd be more to hang on to. yeah, yeah. I mean, this is all from this power line proposal. I mean, we'll see what direction. I mean, I imagine people like an ascendant PQ. I imagine would kind of come to the rescue and try to retain more of this kind of Hydro Quebec. They would try to retain that crown jewel.
It's such a symbol. I think you're probably right. I think a politically smart PQ that wanted to win more than one term probably wouldn't touch it. But yeah, I mean, you never know who's going to have their. Often compromises are made, and it's like, to get into power, we got funding from these people and these people, and now we're gonna, as a result, we're gonna put in this person as minister of energy or whatever, and then it's gonna be like, all right, well, see what
they'll find. What
kind of deals are struck, right?
Yeah, they'll find the okay parts of it to sell off that won't necessarily hurt their base, or they'll find ways to split it off. Anyways, we're just talking.
They will try
hypotheticals.
Very hypothetical, but I do think you have seen a lot of privatization under the PQ, and so it's been a while since they've created any new social programs. That's for sure. And so I wouldn't say we're safe from a sell off.
Okay,
we'll put it that way.
Okay, let's end it on that. Thank you, Hydro Quebec workers, folks, giving us the power. Next news item: forest fires. There is an absolutely massive forest fire happening in Alberta, Manitoba, and Saskatchewan. Manitoba Premier Wab Kinew has said this is the largest evacuation Manitoba will ever have seen in most people's living memory. This fire stretches over something like 200,000 hectares, completely uncontained. In Manitoba alone, 17,000 residents have been forced to leave their homes in recent days. More than 4,000 people in Saskatchewan have had to evacuate. Quebec has sent some water bombers. We got our water birds up over there helping out. As we also sent some for the LA fires. This is kind of I picked out this news item for us because this is sort of I think a recurring thing, which is important to note in our anthropocentric moment, or our moment in the
Anthropocene.
Yes, in our moment in the Anthropocene, our moment in climate
catastrophe.
Thank you. yeah.
I'm here when you need me.
Yeah, you're like, the word you're looking for is climate catastrophe. Yeah, I mean, it's no laughing matter. These kinds of good. These are news items that are kind of written as kind of feel good things of like, hey, we're going to help. And I think it is an absolutely beautiful thing. I always enjoy seeing this kind of like solidarity stuff where like we have countries that send firefighters or like water bombers to help out. I think that's more of that. I remember during the big forest fires we had here in Ontario and Quebec, there was I think it was like an airplane full of people from like firefighters from South Africa, and like they're in the airport, and they're kind of like singing this song of like unity and this kind of song of hope, and that was such a beautiful moment. And I think outside of these feel good stories, the larger context is a climate catastrophe. I think you have a low take on this on the coverage, Drew.
Yeah, I mean, obviously, what we're looking at is undeniably at this point the effect of climate change, which is of course fueled by fossil fuel consumption, which is the thing that the Carney government, a lot of the majority of the provinces besides Quebec and BC, want to ramp up at this very moment. Not just continue, but expand.
Yeah.
Adding new pipeline capacity would result in like hundreds of thousands of barrels of oil additionally per year per day to be sort of shipped
to Asia.
Yeah, and then burned. And they can come up with all kinds of rationale for this, but fundamentally that's the economy. Oh yeah, they're going to. Otherwise, if we don't do it, they're going to burn like more dirty fuel or whatever it is, or we're going to offset it with carbon capture and storage, which is largely just nonsense. But in any case, I think what we're dealing with here is that. But you have certain media outlets, certainly like one of the largest media outlets in Canada, Post Media, which happens to own the local paper in Saskatchewan, the Regina Leader Post, I believe it's called, which is like literally will quote, the Ministry, Environmental and Climate Change Canada, but won't actually mention anywhere in the article that it's climate change. And so you have a media conglomerate that spans Canada that obviously owns a local paper here and multiple local papers here, I think in Montreal.
Gazette.
Gazette, and I can't remember what they bought on the French side, but in any case, hugely influential across the country, and they are effectively engaging in climate denial. And they are, of course, in turn owned by a hedge fund based in New Jersey with links to Trump that has loaded up that organization with debt so that it's basically in a parasitic relationship with a U.S.-based hedge fund.
I do believe with the last 8 federal elections have endorsed the Conservatives as well.
Yeah, exactly. and so you have this absolutely regressive force in Canadian media that's still is still doing its thing, engaging in de facto climate denial, which is unfortunate to say the least.
Yeah, I remember during the big forest fires in like 2022, the ones that made the skies like all orange, like all around the East Coast, like all the way to New York City. At that time, I was working in Ottawa. I remember it was this this absolutely absurd kind of moment of like waking up, walking outside in Ottawa. The sky is just completely orange from like just devastating forest fires. Going into the House of Commons and hearing the Conservatives just kind of do the same talking points about how they're being too alarmist about this. We don't need a carbon tax, and it's not about the carbon tax. It's much more about the actual just position against any kind of like climate solutions that it's setting up. And to me, it was such a crisis moment. I mean, it was just absolute. I was about to lose my mind, like in the movie Network. I was about to be like,
I'm like, what
the hell is going on? I mean, this is I guess this is an extension of that, right? You have this kind of continued kind of like, we're not going to name the problem. We're not going to look at this. It's just, hey, it was just another completely devastating fire.
They've set up these incredible bulwarks against reality. I mean, it's very sophisticated. I mean, I remember being in Alberta, and you just talk to people. I mean, I was hitchhiking through Alberta in the mid 2000s, and some like executive of like some small oil company picked us up, and he was just complete climate denial, just outright. And I was just like, wow. Tell me more about how like carbon dioxide is good for the planet. I mean, it's just it's wild stuff, but it's just totally mainstream there. It's not even questioned, really.
No, of course. I mean, so much of them. I mean, so much of the economy there is held up by that industry, right? Yeah. So you can't really like to question it. Is to question the industry. Is to question even like the premise of how you make a living, right? And it's like don't even. It's like don't even. That's not even.
Well, the grip that the industry has on people's reality is next level for sure.
Yeah. Well, I mean, it's interesting that places like Quebec, because of Hydro-Quebec, because of not the non-reliance on things like fossil fuels, allows for that kind of like distance to that, right? Because we don't rely on it, we can be like, guys, maybe you guys are a little high on the fumes of these tar sands.
Absolutely,
I always think it's interesting that there's that like large distinction. I mean, to me, this kind of ties into that kind of like, what's it like? Base and superstructure kind of thing, right? Of like what industries are set up here, what reliance do they have, and how does that show up in culture? How does that show up in policy? How does that show up in just political opinion? And here we are not of the gas, oil and gas cult that Albertans might be. Where were you hitchhiking to?
Fort McMurray.
Oh, whoa!
Yeah. We were going to go down the tar sands. We went up the Mackenzie River to Fort Chipewyan and did some reporting on the sort of downstream effects of downstream and downwind effects on sort of indigenous communities, and also interviewed some workers and did coverage from a variety of perspectives. Then this is 2008 or whatever.
Yeah.
But yeah.
Awesome. Yeah. What were the downstream effects?
Cancer.
Oh my God! Yeah, I mean, there you go, man. I mean, this is a classic kind of like industrial kind of like as the story of industrial hazards. Like you have the immediate thing is these things of like it's like actual like biological harm to humans, to living beings around these kinds of sites of industry, and then of course the longer the larger shadow that is being cast over us is these things of like climate catastrophes, right? This is the new normal, right? This is the new rhythm of modern day life, where during fire season from May to June is no longer these kind of like contained fires. It's absolutely uncontrolled wildfires that just completely rip apart the areas of forests that are akin to small European countries.
Absolutely. I mean, and Mark Carney's hometown is actually downstream from the Fort Smith. Northwest Territories is downstream from the tar sands as well. So,
terrible tragedy. Thank you for bringing the climate change at the forefront, and make sure always keep talking about climate change, folks. These people live. You want to lift the veil of the oil and gas industry. You want to wake them up and let them smell the wildfire smoke.
It's dark days, and not just because of the smoke filling the sky in Manitoba, but we got to keep speaking about it.
Yeah, thank you to our brave pilots and firefighters who are there. I hope some policies enacted so we do not have to rely on them. But
I support those troops anyway.
Yeah. There you go. Next news item, our our favorite former mayor of Montreal. No, not Applebaum. Denis Coderre. He's yet again has inserted himself into the headlines, calling on the Liberals to vote for a Quebec Conservative leader in the by-election. This is from the article. A dramatic turn of events in North Athabasca. Denis Coderre endorsed Éric Duhaime and is calling on Liberals and Federalists in the riding to vote for the Conservative leader. The article continues with a quote by him. A party leader, whoever they are, if it had been anyone else, I would have done the same damn thing. A party leader has the right to sit in the National Assembly, thundered the former mayor of Montreal on Thursday during a press briefing in Victoriaville alongside Éric Duhaime. According to Coderre, the Conservative leader's idea must be heard within the National Assembly. The interests of Quebecers, including the abolition of the carbon tax, and the only one who has been clear, transparent, and about this is Éric Duhaime, he stated. So here we have the former mayor of Montreal. Sort of, he's always been kind of conservative. Big represent. Denis Coderre was a big representative of, let's say, the auto dealership lobby here in Montreal. Former Quebec Liberal Party MP. He's come out and told Liberals to vote for Duhaime in this by-election. I'm kind of curious what you make of this.
Yeah, I mean, Coderre is, say what you will about him. He's somebody who's like, he's got his ear to the ground and his eye on the polls, and is also listening to sort of elite opinion. And when you see those things sort of converge, he's going to be right there. I'm curious what his angle is. I mean, he got sort of kicked out of the Quebec Liberal Party sort of like made it too hard for him to participate because he had a bunch of tax issues. And according to him, he was going through divorce at the same time. So this was like causing his tax issues to be compounded. He's had to sell his house in Montreal Nord for $800,000. And which is quite modest for a politician of his stature, I'll have to say. They don't. I would set the price a little bit higher for saying and doing the things that Coderre has done, but in any case, I would say it's pretty clear to me that this is going way beyond some kind of principled upholding of parliamentary norms, especially since he's out of the political game. I think he's playing a game in relation to the Liberal Party. Notably on the radio the other day, he was talking about this. He refused to rule out
running for the Conservatives.
Running for the Quebec Conservative Party, Éric Duhaime's party. And so, regardless of what he's doing, I think he is. He also affirmed his undying support for Israel in the middle of the current starvation campaign, which is, just unspeakable. To add an unnuanced support for the Israeli state at this moment is just beyond grim, I would say. But just from my personal perspective in any case. But
I think most Metropolis listeners and viewers would agree.
People can make up their own minds. But in any case, Coderre is clearly recording some kind of it might be aligning with his sort of divorced guy energy, but I think it's also he's
a loose cannon now.
Well, I think he sees a rising tide of this sort of reactionary sentiment, and he's clearly trying to like align himself with it in really prominent, really like calculated way.
Mm-hmm.
What he's going to do with that alignment, hard to say. But I think he has some kind of plan. He's definitely not ruling out future runs, and so it's a question of like, okay, what is he going to stay a liberal? Is he going to do some kind of late life switcheroo?
Right,
I'm getting real Elon Musk energy here in the sense that you have somebody who's like the nominal progressive champion who just like has a divorce, has a kid.
I'm sorry, who's the progressive champion?
Well, Elon Musk, I think, was a symbol of like, addressing climate change and
sure.
I mean, it's hard to remember now, but like a few years ago, and then Coderre as well. I mean, he was a big proponent of Chrétien and Paul Martin, and like this sort of like would bring this sort of like homme du comté, like sort of formally populist energy to the party and would deliver ridings, in that sort of spirit.
Okay, sure.
Montreal North, like he say what you will about him, he had a genuine connection to the people of that riding, of that neighborhood, and was able to get a lot of them to vote for him for what God knows what reason, but there was a connection there. There was a political relationship. He, clearly
just smart politicking,
found the right buttons to push and the right favors to sort of to dole out. So, he's clearly got something in mind. But I'm dreading finding out what it is.
Hey, thanks for being back. So we just spoke about former Mayor Denis Coderre cozying up to FGM, endorsing him, calling on liberals to vote for him. It's going to be interesting seeing what he's queuing up for. Like you were saying, potentially running with the Conservatives, which he hasn't ruled out, or maybe coming back to the Liberals and being like, all right, my taxes are in order. What the Liberals need is more Conservatives, which is me, So I can't wait for the maybe an eventual merger, perhaps, a Liberal Conservative Party of Quebec.
He did also note the number of members, the small number of members that he repeated this a few times, the number of members that the Quebec Liberals have. And so, I think his probably feeling is that if you can get, if he can add 10,000 Conservative maniacs to the member rolls, along with a few other constituencies, then he can take over the party eventually. But who knows? Who knows what he actually has in mind?
It's interesting, that kind of like reactionary, the new kind of reactionary right, kind of that's epitomized by like, let's say, the Freedom Convoy, by the People's Party of Canada, this sort of like reactionary right. It has not really found too much of a presence, I find, in parliamentary politics.
No.
But it feels like this could be a potential for them, because he's clearly catering towards that kind of attitude, right? Talking about the carbon tax.
My guess is he's looking at Poilievre and saying, okay, there's a model that hasn't been landed in Quebec yet, and maybe I'm the guy.
I have a tough time imagining that landing in Quebec, but maybe it's through some kind of liberal door that they're going to find it through. You have this great segue. I want you to read that.
And speaking of divorced guys on a political rampage,
Elon Musk. The last news item. This is like the lighthearted news to end the episode. Tesla registrations down 90% in Quebec in first quarter of 2025. The article on CBC News goes, Quebec EV buyers' relationship with Tesla is showing signs of souring as sales in the province plummeted in the first quarter of 2025. Only 524 Teslas were registered in Quebec between January 1st and March 31st, according to Quebec's Auto Insurance Board, the SAC. That is a 90% drop from the previous quarter, when 5,097 of the electric automakers' cars were registered in the province, as first reported by Le Devoir. So clearly, not a good quarter for Tesla in Quebec. Bad news for them. good news for people with morals. I don't know.
Humanity, yeah.
Humanity.
I mean, this is in the context, obviously, of Elon Musk appearing on stage with a giant chainsaw given to him by the president, I believe, of Argentina.
Milei?
Yeah. And making a real big point of talking about how he's cutting just with absolute abandon government programs, and he I think his quote was, he's feeding USAID into a wood chipper, so that being the main sort of foreign aid organization of the US government. There was a study out of Boston University recently that said that estimated basically that 300,000 people would probably die as a result of the cuts that he made to USAID and the sort of programs. And then NPR did a follow-up interview with like a mother in, I think it was Senegal, whose son had sickle cell anemia and had been able to access sort of medical care through a US funded clinic and died as a result. So, whether it's thousands, tens of thousands, or hundreds of thousands, it's like just an absolute travesty of just reckless actions leading to just catastrophic effects, and completely preventable catastrophic effects from basically political posturing that he was like having fun with this chainsaw on stage. I mean, it's not to take the lighthearted nature completely out of this news in Quebec, but I mean, the 90% drop is the sort of minimum that one could reasonably expect from this kind of behavior, of the very prominent CEO of this corporation. Taking these kinds of actions.
Yeah. I mean, you've seen this more and more now, especially since like he did the Sig Hail right on stage. That was like, I mean, like you have Elon Musk doing the Sig Hail,
which is now like sort of pretending to be hurt that people thought that he was doing that. It's just like
it's so obvious. I mean, there's so much footage of Elon Musk,
Hyler's remorse, I call it.
Yeah. Elon Musk, other people in the Trump sphere doing that, and it's clear. I mean, they know what they're doing, right? They're just trying to like rile the base up, and it's working. But clearly, here in Quebec, people were sort of begun to sour on him.
There are some places where the Nazis still have a bad reputation.
Yeah. Hey, good job, Quebecers. I mean, this is what you get. This is what you get.
I mean, who are these 10%? That's what I want to know.
Sometimes you see,
and there are people who are like, bought Cybertrucks and are driving them around downtown. It's like it's kind of unfathomable, honestly.
But, I mean, they're hideous. They don't work well. They have terrible like was it like actual like off-road capability is terrible. I remember during the winter, you had a few Cybertrucks in Montreal, and there'd be like 10, 12 centimeters of snow, and they'd be stuck. And to me, I remember when the Cybertruck first started rolling out, I was like, you get the truck element and they're electrifying it. I was like, there's some potential here. But then just seeing it get stuck with like less than like a foot of snow, I'm like, what is the point of all this then? I mean, clearly this is just like,
I mean, I think this is peak Elon Musk before he sort of outed himself as a Nazi sympathizer. But he was he had the design team sort of like reporting to him and being like, does this look cool enough for you, Mr. Musk? And he's like, oh, add more sharp angles and make it like this. And they're like, okay, we'll come back in a week. And then 5 to 10 iterations of that, and you get the sort of disaster that is the Cybertruck.
They must have designed that thing in like on Nintendo 64, given all there's very few polygons there,
some sharp angles. Absolutely.
I mean, this news is sort of I think surprising. I'm always interested in hearing about sort of like these kinds of like consumer shifts with these kinds of things, because sometimes I'm kind of doubtful that it actually has
90% is about as dramatic as it gets.
90% drop in the registration is huge. I mean, now you'll see like Teslas with like little stickers that said, "I bought this before Elon was crazy," and I think I'll give the caveat of like, I think you bought it before he was this level of crazy, but like I think people who were paying attention were always knew that there was something kind of
he was merely undermining high-speed rail in California. Anyway.
making money off his parents making money off the apartheid. I mean, it's emerald mines in South Africa during the apartheid. It's sort of like classic, like almost like Disney villain kind of stuff. Anyways, that's we want to end the show on that. Yeah, we'll see what other EVs Quebecers are turning towards. Perhaps charging them will no longer be free in a few years. We'll see. We'll see. Lots of great takes today, Drew. Thank you for coming on, having this conversation with me.
Thanks for having me.
Of course. And thank you, viewer, for listening or watching. Be sure to like, comment, subscribe. What do you think about Teslas? What do you think about the language laws and the things we discussed on the show? Feel free to message us. Give me your opinion. And I want the spiciest takes, people. All right. Have a good time. Take care.